the swan and started appreciating it, and the swan said, I used to think I was the happiest bird in creation until I saw the parrot, because the parrot had colour. The colour was beautiful. It had these couple of beautiful colours, green, blue. The swan went up to the parrot and said, you must be the most fortunate bird in creation. And the parrot said, I used to think that. But one day I saw a peacock and I thought, colour? I thought I had colour. That's real colour. And so the crow, the swan, the parrot all went to the peacock who was in the zoo. And thousands of people were queuing up to see the peacock. And they said, you are the most fortunate bird in creation. And don't lie to us, don't make it up, because thousands of people are coming to see you. And the peacock said, I used to think that. But nowadays I look around and I see that the peacock, the swan, the parrot, they're all in a cage. And there's only one bird which is free. And that bird is the crow. And so nowadays I think, I'd love to be a crow. And so I heard this story the other day, and I heard it when I was a kid. And what occurred to me is that the story made sense when I was a kid, but I think after 30 years I'm kind of realizing its depth a bit more. Truth is actually simple. Einstein said you'll know the truth because it will have two characteristics. It will be simple and it will be beautiful. So truth is actually simple and beautiful, but sometimes it takes a long time for us to understand it. So this is a story about gratitude. We tend to overvalue what we don't have, and we undervalue what we do have. And so these prayers of gratitude really help us to appreciate that wherever we're in life, it's perfect. Om Ajnana-timirandhasya Jnananjana Shalakaya Chakshurmilitamena Tasmai Shri Gurave Namaha. Om Ajnana-timirandhasya Jnananjana Shalakaya Chakshurmilitamena Tasmai Shri Gurave Namaha. Om Ajnana-timirandhasya Jnananjana Shalakaya Chakshurmilitamena Tasmai Shri Gurave Namaha. So this evening we are discussing the topic sound and spirituality. As I was growing up, I was going to different religious places, temples mainly. And my conception of a temple was that a temple is a place of stillness, a place of solitude, a place of seriousness, and a place of silence. And then I came to the Hare Krishna temple. It was almost like the antithesis of everything, you know, like stillness. Like these guys are like dancing. They're like half the time they're more like in the air than on the floor, you know. It's like silence, like my God, it's like you can get noise-induced hearing loss in the Hare Krishna temple, you know, it's like sometimes it's so loud. And it definitely wasn't a serious place. I mean, everyone was joyful, it seemed like a festival, and one thing that really impressed me about the devotees of Krishna was how much they could eat. It seemed like a place of joy. So it was almost like it was kind of mind-blowing to think of spirituality in these terms. And I remember speaking to one of the monks and he said, singing, dancing, smiling, and laughing, these are the most natural expressions of happiness. And if you can't do that in a spiritual place, if you can't sing, if you can't dance, then what kind of spirituality is that? Spirituality should be able to awaken your deepest emotions. Even our dear friend Friedrich Nietzsche said that. He said, I will only believe in a God who knows how to dance. And so sometimes people have a conception of spirituality, and actually there's something much more to discover. What is more powerful, silence or sound? It's an interesting question. In one sense, they're both very, very powerful. And actually, Eastern teachers talk about the power of silence. What's happening is we have our consciousness, and our consciousness is kind of being projected through the windows of the five senses into the world. And when our consciousness is projected through the windows of those senses into the world, then it's a chaotic world out there. Because our consciousness meets with so many things, the good, the bad, and the ugly. So therefore it's said that silence, or withdrawing the consciousness away from the world, away from that stimulation, away from that agitation, away from that provocation, definitely brings a sense of peace and calmness. And therefore you'll find in practically every spiritual tradition there's some element of solitude, there's some element of silence, and there's some element of withdrawing from the world. And that's something that we can all do. When I was traveling in India at the age of 21, kind of exploring my spirituality, I met someone and I asked him for some advice, and he said, every year disconnect for 1 month. Every month disconnect for 1 day. And every day disconnect for 1 hour. Disconnect to connect. I was like, you should be on TEDx. It was kind of nice, it was snappy, it was practical, and as I tried to apply and live that in my life, I found it was also incredibly powerful as well. So there's definitely something to be said for withdrawal, for silence, for solitude, and for embracing that. Nowadays people are afraid of solitude because they think being alone means being lonely. But being alone can also be the most energizing experience that can then allow you to connect with others in the deepest way. And therefore, in all spiritual traditions, as I mentioned, solitude is there. However, the ancient teachers of the Vedas explain that sound is perhaps something which can build upon solitude and silence, and then allow us, after pulling back our consciousness from the craziness of the world, with sound we allow our consciousness to re-enter the world, but in an uplifted state, where rather than becoming influenced by the world, we become influencers of the world in a very, very positive and beautiful way. And when we uplift our consciousness through sound and we re-engage with the world, we see a different world, we see different opportunities, and we have a completely different experience. And therefore sound is very, very powerful. In the ancient Bhagavad Gita is mentioned that material creation is encompassed in 5 elements. In Sanskrit it's mentioned Bhumirapo nalo vayu kamano buddhirevacha ahankara iti amme bhinna prakritirashtadha. That basically there are 5 physical elements which are the building blocks of the universe. Earth, water, fire, air, and ether. It's said that within ether, which is the most subtle element, sound is contained. The next most subtle element is air. And it's said within air, you have sound and touch. Then the next element which evolves is fire. And fire has sound, it has touch, but it also has form. And then the next element is water. And water carries all of those experiences, sound, form, right? Yeah. Touch, sorry. I always get this one mixed up. And it adds in taste. Water has taste. And then the most gross element, earth, adds all of those, and then it adds fragrance, smell. And so sound is said to be the beginning of creation. This is a fact which is corroborated in many, many different spiritual traditions. Sound is the beginning of everything. Sound is the trigger. And even if we look at our lives, often sound is what triggered many aspects of our life journey. Something someone said to you, something you heard, something you were inspired by, basically then drove your life trajectory. And so sound is incredibly powerful. And amongst all the sound vibrations, mantra is considered the most powerful sound vibration in creation. There's sound which is spoken on the physical level. Then there's sound which takes place on the mental level. Right now, all of you are listening, but there's a sound within your mind. When's this guy going to stop? So there could also be a sound which is a much more subtle type of sound which is occurring in your mind. And then there's an even more subtle type of sound which is a sound of intuition. It's not one that you're pushing, but it's a sound which just kind of enters spontaneously into your consciousness to sometimes reveal things. But it's said beyond all of those levels of sound, in Sanskrit we say Vaikari, physical, Madhyama, mental, Pashyanti, intellectual or higher, but then above all of those sounds is Pada, transcendental sound. And this sound actually connects you with a higher nature, a spiritual nature, an eternal nature. And perhaps the most famous and the most widespread of all Pada sound vibrations are mantras. And so we chant mantras again and again, and these mantras bring us into a beautiful state of consciousness. We often go on the streets and we chant these mantras, and once we were in Scotland, and after singing on the streets, one person came up to me and said, "I love you guys, you're always singing, you're always dancing, you're always smiling, but don't you guys have any new songs?" So then I just spent some time explaining to him that this is a mantra, and the more you sing it, the deeper it goes, and the more profound effect it has in terms of moving your consciousness. Today, what I want to share with you in the few moments we have is how sound vibration can bring you into what we could call in contemporary terms your spiritual flow state. Are you in your flow state? If I asked you, what does flow state mean to you? Could someone give me an idea? How do you know that you are in flow? Peaceful. Okay, so you feel emotions whereby your consciousness is calm, serene, and unagitated. Okay. What else would you describe to be the flow state, which is the ultimate kind of state of our being? Yes?
Not punctured with anxiety.
Not punctured with anxiety, not a limiting or a negative mentality, but a mentality which is free to explore, to discover. Very good. What else? Unaffected, a consciousness in which the external world and all its unlimited permutations and experiences, you're able to allow it not to displace your consciousness. Very good. Yes? Consistent energy, no ebbs and flows. When you're in your flow state, then you kind of function on an optimum level of energy that never wanes or seems to diminish. Thank you. Yes?
Free from obstacles, freedom.
Freedom from obstacles. Obstacles created by our own mind.
Ourselves.
Yeah.
So just freedom.
Freedom.
Full freedom.
Full freedom. Excellent. Wonderful. Just sounds beautiful. Yes.
I was thinking of a sense of purpose that was full of positivity.
A sense of purpose that's full of positivity. Yeah, they say the best alarm clock in the world is purpose. Because when your eyes open in the morning, if you have a purpose, a hunger, an enthusiasm, something amazing that you're trying to achieve, you jump out of bed. So yes, purpose and positivity, yes.
Your conscious mind is more disconnected, things happen more automatically.
Okay, now we're getting a little even deeper. It's a flow state is something where you're almost being led, sometimes even unconsciously, but you seem to be moving in a direction which just feels natural, which feels providential, which feels like your calling. Okay, so yes, there are energies in the universe, there are vibrations, there are frequencies, and as we come into flow state, we can benefit and align ourselves with certain energies which take us to where we want to go. Great, yeah. I'm just getting ideas for my next presentation, so please continue. I'll credit you. Yes.
There's rivers and creeks, and they flow from maybe at the tops of the mountains, or they flow from the ocean, and they have this, like they keep flowing and flowing and flowing until they get to the merge with the ocean. They don't stop till they get there, and it never ends. It's like it's all when you see a river constantly flow.
Yeah.
So it never stops, and similar to how maybe it's an analogy to how we.
It's not a destination, it's a journey kind of thing. Yeah. When you're in flow state, you're not constantly meditating on a destination. When we're not in flow state, we're constantly meditating on an end or a goal or a final conclusion. But when you're in flow state, you're kind of almost just flowing. You're just happy with the journey that you're on, and that in itself is its reward. That's so beautiful. Yeah, thank you so much. Yeah, there's an ancient Sanskrit verse like that in the Gita. Brahma Bhuta Prashannatma na sochati na kankshati. That when one is established on the spiritual platform, then they're not constantly gravitating or lamenting for the past or hankering for a future, but in the moment, the power of now. Yeah, these are all beautiful aspects of spiritual flow state. What we'll find is that in the world today, contemporary writers will talk about ancient principles and use it and describe it in certain terminology, and these things have also been explored by the sages. Today I'll explain to you 3 keys to finding your flow state. And the reason I'm sharing these keys with you is because spiritual sound can actually help you on a subtle level to actually do these 3 things. And when we do these 3 things, then what happens with the help of spiritual sound, then what happens is we find a divine flow in our life. All of us are here, we're in this world, and according to Eastern wisdom teachers, it's not by chance. We each have something to do here. And so the first step in finding your spiritual flow state is to find your dharma. Dharma is a Sanskrit word. In modern English, we would probably call it purpose, or meaning, or calling, or your vision for your life. Each person is individual. Each person, as Einstein said, is a genius. But if you convince a fish that it has to climb a tree, it will live its whole life thinking it's a failure. And so the first step in finding spiritual flow is we have to first know, what is my unique purpose? Too often we try to copy someone else's life. Imagine you're in an exam and you felt like you hadn't revised, but you ended up sitting next to the cleverest person in the class and thought, well, it must be arrangement. And in the exam you then went on to copy every single answer on their paper, and you came out of the exam hall thinking you aced it, only to find out that everyone had a different question paper. Perhaps some of that is what happens in our own life. We tend to, there's such a tendency within each one of us to try to imitate, to try to in some way emulate someone else's life. Yet the Bhagavad Gita and ancient Sanskrit texts teach us we each have our own purpose, our own dharma. So the first step in finding spiritual flow state is to find your dharma. And the interesting thing is that we each have 2 dharmas. In Sanskrit, one dharma is known as a swadharma, and another dharma is known as a sanatan dharma. A swadharma means your purpose in this life, and the sanatan dharma means your purpose in eternity. And therefore, both of those dharmas can be integrated, and when they are understood and followed, then one achieves their greatest potential. The second step in finding your spiritual flow state is to deepen your selflessness. Purpose or dharma is never selfish. So the goal of life is not just to know the unique abilities that you have and to follow those, but once you know those things that you're meant to do in this world, to somehow direct it towards beautiful contribution in the world. We earn a living by what we get, but we earn a life by what we give. And therefore, when we deepen our selflessness, then we move closer towards our spiritual flow state, because there's no greater feeling of contentment, joy, and happiness in life separate from making a contribution to other people's happiness. And so the second aspect of flow state is to deepen your selflessness. And the final step in finding your flow state is, once you've found your purpose, once you've deepened your selflessness and you're using your purpose in contribution, the third step, which is perhaps the most mystical, is to align with the divine. Because what will happen is every single day opportunities will open up. Every single day you'll encounter people. You'll go through events, experiences, and emotions. And you know what? Nothing's random. Everything is a calling. Everything is a lesson. Everything is an invitation to move towards what you're meant to do in this life. And so, to align with the divine means to understand that there is a calling for me. There are certain arrangements and opportunities opening up for me. And when I don't ignore those, sometimes in our life we feel like something is opening up for us. And we're kind of like, sure, that this is what I'm meant to do, this is what I'm meant to follow. But there's something in us which hesitates, something which within us which holds us back, and some inhibition. And when we align with the divine and we open our hearts to those plans and follow them without hesitation, then we enter into spiritual flow state. Now the beautiful thing about sound, remember I began the talk by talking about Einstein, who said you know the truth because it's beautiful and it's simple. Singing, mantras and sounds are simple, they're very, very beautiful, and they're incredibly powerful, because by connecting with sound vibration, you come in contact with your original nature and you find your purpose. Not just that, but you purify your consciousness and therefore you deepen your selflessness. We're living in a world which is based around selfishness. And so the mantra purifies the consciousness and brings that selflessness in. And the sound, the mantra, perhaps in its deepest sense, helps us to actually communicate with divinity. It helps us to actually hear divinity. And then what happens is we become much more empowered to align with the divine. And when we do these three things, then what happens is we find our spiritual flow state. And then all the things that all of you mentioned which characterize flow state, we actually experience in our life. And so, spending time every single day to disconnect, but not just be silent, to utilize spiritual sound, to find our purpose, deepen our selflessness, and align with the divine. If we take that time every single day, then we'll find that life becomes like a transcendental drama. And amazing things, magical things, mystical things, moving things, memorable things begin to happen. Because we are spiritual beings, and there is a spiritual plan that each one of us are meant to enter into. And that is the invitation of the sages of the East through their teachings in ancient scriptures like the Vedas. So these were some thoughts I wanted to share with you about spirituality, sound, and finding your flow state. I think we have still a little bit more time, is it? Yeah. I guess at this stage I just wanted to kind of open it up and see whether any of you may have any questions, any comments, any reflections, or perhaps anything I said that you'd like to know perhaps more about. Yes?
You can say that in this day and age in Kali Yuga, most of our suffering comes from within. Yeah. So in this day and age in Kali Yuga, most of our suffering, true suffering, comes from within, from the mind. And out of all of that, probably you can say that fear is the most stabilizing and predominant fixation of the mind, trying to hold on to what we hold dear and trying to avoid at any cost what we don't like. And we know that ultimately it's our attachments that are causing that, but we also know that we can't artificially give up the attachment. It's a gradual process. So what do we do in that in-between stage?
How to
How do
overcome
we deal
fear.
with it in the most positive, wholesome way?
Yes, I was mentioning and referencing today the Bhagavad Gita, and an ancient commentator, Keshava Swami, he observes that the very first thing which Krishna says in the Gita 2:11 Asocyan vasocastvam pragyavadamscha bhashashe. He uses this word socha, and he tells Arjuna, do not fear, do not lament, do not be in anxiety. And Jiva Goswami notices that the very last thing which Krishna says in the Bhagavad Gita, Moksha Yishyami Ma Sucha. The very, very final thing he says is, don't fear, don't be in anxiety, don't worry about anything. And he observes this and says that this is the basic human condition, that every single person is so fearful. It's like those cartoons where everything is sunny, but then there's like a dark cloud following this person over them, and this fear keeps overshadowing our life. We're fearful about the past, we're fearful about the future, we're fearful about our career, we're fearful about our health. When we're unhappy, we're fearful it will never end. When we're happy, we're fearful it will end. Very difficult. Fearless persons are not people who don't have any fears. Fearless people are those who have a purpose which is so captivating that their fears pale into insignificance. If we try to overcome fear by neutralizing all of those things which are causing us fear, we're losing a battle, where we're fighting a battle which we're going to lose. Instead, the way to overcome fear is to find something so captivating, so enchanting, so inspiring, so motivating, that to move in that direction, you're willing to do anything. And so that is the real way to overcome fear. Not by trying to neutralize the circumstances around us, but by finding something which elevates our consciousness beyond that. And in that way, we live life unbound. So Nelson Mandela said, let your decisions in life reflect your dreams and not your fears. You see? We just have to get more excited about something. Like, I never liked public speaking, and then someone told me something which changed the way I did it. He said, when you come up to the mic, there's a certain energy that goes through your body when like 150 people are sitting in front of you, waiting to see what you have to say. There's a certain energy which goes through your body. And what happens is, if you're meditating on how you're going to fail, if you're meditating on what's going to go wrong, then what that energy is complete nervousness. But when you come up to the mic and that energy goes through you, when you become excited about how you can use this opportunity to serve, how you can make a contribution, how what you may share may help someone in their journey, then you become excited. Did you know that excitement and nervousness is exactly the same energy? It's just energy which is processed through a different lens of thinking. And so we have to start in our life getting excited about what could go right, and not being constantly preoccupied about what could go wrong. And when we find something that's so great, that's so beautiful, we think, I have to make this happen. I have to do this. And that makes you fearless. And so, fearless people are people who have a purpose that's so great that their fears pale into significance. No worries. Some ideas, so much more could be said on that, but thank you. Thank you so much. Is that a hand? Yes? Yes.
You were talking about how you were talking about how sound is the beginning
Of creation, yeah.
of creation, and I heard that Om
was the primordial sound. What does that mean? Do you know what the primordial sound means? Because I heard that was Om.
Yeah.
So, do you know much about that? Is it the Bhagavad Gita?
Yeah.
Krishna is Om.
Yeah, thank you so much. Yes, Krishna says that of sound vibrations I am Om. So, primordial, I guess the word primordial could be described in different ways, but it basically means that which existed before the manifested creation as we know came about. And so, according to the Vedic teachers, time is cyclical. Time is not linear, there's not a beginning and an end, but it simply goes through cycles of manifestation and then maintenance and eventually destruction. So just like we have the seasons in a year, the cosmos also goes through different cycles of creation and destruction. And so it's mentioned that divinity, God, Krishna, exists beyond all of that time frame. And sound is the first ingredient which then triggers the rest of the material elements to then come about in the world. So I mentioned 5 of the elements: earth, water, fire, air, ether. And then there are said to be 3 subtle elements: mind, intelligence, and ego. Added to that are 5 senses, 5 sense objects. Like this, there's said to be 24 building blocks of creation. But yes, Om is the sound representation of divinity. It's said that divinity, Bhinnatvan Nama Namino, is mentioned in Sanskrit. Divinity is not different from the name. The name and the personality are actually completely identical. And so, in the form of sound vibration, divinity triggers creation, which is then described element by element like that. Some idea. Thank you. Yes. Okay, yes.
Hi, Krishna Maharaj. I just wanted to say a little thing about fearless. Srila Prabhupada was once asked, what do you feel when you chant Hare Krishna? And he said, when I chant Hare Krishna, I feel fearless. So that was how Srila Prabhupada found his purpose, I suppose.
Yes, thank you so much. Yeah, when we, as mentioned, Bhinnatvan Nama Namino, that the name of God and God are not different. So when you chant the name of God, chant the name of divinity, then what happens is you feel the presence, you feel the connection, you feel the shelter of that divinity. Sometimes they say, don't tell God how big your problems are, tell your problems how big God is. And so in that way, to feel fearless, that's why this sound is such an accessible way to come in contact. Otherwise, sometimes that person, that divine person, seems very, very far away. And so in Eastern theology, we understand that divinity is transcendent, but also immanent. In many theologies in the world, the idea is that there's a God, but God is far away, and He's in another realm, He's in another dimension. But the Vedas explain that God is not just transcendent, but God is also immanent, accessible, and can be interacted with in our present condition. And sound is said to be that way by which we can make that contact. Yeah, thank you so much. Yes, I see a few hands here.
Thank you, Maharaj. When you're talking about those 3 steps, does it have to be like followed in that order, or are you able to maybe connect with the divine as a way to find your purpose?
Yeah, thank you
Could
so
it be
much.
separate?
Yeah. Yeah, I think so. Yeah, I don't think they're necessarily sequential. Of course, they are sequential in the sense that once we know our purpose and we know where we want to engage our energies, then we can then work on how we want to do that in a selfless way. And then as we develop that desire to do it in a selfless way, then divinity reciprocates with us by opening up many, many opportunities and pathways for us. So in one sense we can say there is a connection between them in that order. But yes, I think at every point, sometimes people, when we talk about finding purpose, we tend to think of it as a one-off event. But nowadays I feel like, even for myself, I feel like I'm constantly refining and rediscovering purpose, because life changes, you discover more about yourself, and we constantly refine that. So yeah, thank you. Yeah, I think they can also be constantly going on side by side. Thank you. Yes. Yes.
How can we see or understand or relate to our conditioned self? And sometimes you might have the fortune to reach a point you think, oh, it's real, but you feel like you're just in a sleep. You don't you're reading it, you know this is real, and there's a part of you that just wants to wake up, but the other part goes on automatic sleep. So how should we relate to that conditioned self? How do we work with it?
Yeah, yeah. So we have almost a conditioned side to us, habits, we have certain behaviors, attitudes which we know are not serving us, are not really us, but we kind of can't really shake them off. They're kind of like a bad smell, just keen to keep hanging around. And how do we then deal with that? Well, I think I talked today about disconnection time, and what happens in life is we play so many different identities. We have an identity at the temple, we have an identity at work, we have an identity on Instagram and an identity on TikTok, and we have an identity on Sunday, and then we have another identity on Monday, and buried underneath all of those identities is who we really are. And what happens is that people have become so expert at ignoring themselves. I'm not who I think I am, I'm not who you think I am, I'm who I think you think I am. And that's how disconnected we've become from our own authenticity. And so the more spaces we have in our life where we realize, I am a spirit soul, and I'm just playing a bunch of different roles, that connection with one's first identity, one's eternal identity, over a sustained amount of time, helps us to become observers of our own other identities instead of identifying with them. So it takes practice, because we've become so intertwined with those things. You may have heard of method actors, or for example, actors who play a role for so long that once the drama's over or the movie's done, for months and sometimes years they're still in that role because they got so into it. Many actors have talked about this. So we're kind of like that. So yeah, we're suffering from spiritual amnesia. And so the very first thing we do in the morning is we realize I have nothing to do with this world in eternity. Of course, we do have duties, we have responsibilities, we have things we're trying to do. But in the highest sense, I'm beyond all these things. And when we do that for a sustained amount of time, then we realize we don't mix up our roles with our identity. That's the problem in the world, that we make our roles our identities. Some ideas. Yeah, sure. I see many hands, just tell me when we're...
Okay.
Yeah. The little guy gets the priority. I hope it's not a confuse the Swami question.
Do you think if we have time to disconnect more, do you think we should disconnect more?
Wow. Yeah, come and join me. Yeah, if we have time, then we can. But the goal of life is not just to be disconnected from the world, actually. The goal of life is to be connected with the world, to do something beautiful for the world. What would you say every single person in the world is looking for? It doesn't matter who they are. What would you say everyone is looking for, regardless of who they are?
Like happiness.
Happiness, excellent.
For purpose, but
Happiness, yes, happiness. And what would you say brings the greatest happiness in someone's life? This is your chance. What do you think makes us most happy? What made you most happy in your life? Sorry, I'm putting you on the spot, yeah.
just being here.
Being here? Oh, okay, wow, excellent. You mean in New Govardhan and with all these beautiful people? Excellent. Thank you. Yes, being here with this community, with all these people. Love is what brings the greatest happiness, isn't it? We want to have relationships, we want to have friendships. And so the goal of life is not to disconnect. The goal of life is to actually deeply connect. Connect with the world, connect with people, connect with hearts. But when we take some time to disconnect, then we can connect better. And so if you have more time, you can do a bit more disconnection, but don't become so disconnected that you forget to reconnect. Because the goal is to connect. We want to be in the world, and we want to do something beautiful in our time here by which we can experience and express love. Is that all right? Excellent. Thank you so much.
Hare Krishna.
Hare Krishna.
We see in the world today, through music, through cinema, that many people are attached to negative sound vibration, negative sound.
Yeah.
How does one get a taste for higher sound in the world that we live in today?
Yeah. Yeah, different sounds stimulate us in different ways. And therefore people, it's interesting, many people are just looking to be stimulated. Why would someone pay money to go and watch a horror movie? It's like sometimes you think about that, no? Like, why would you pay money to get just get scared? Interesting. People pay them that. Because actually what most people are looking for is some kind of stimulation. So it's explained that there is an unstimulated state, almost a boredom, a dullness. And then we look for things which at least stimulate something. But higher than that, as I said, the highest emotions that we're looking for are love and connection and inspiration and reciprocation with others. And therefore, what we'll see is that when we interact with spiritual sound vibration, not only does it stimulate us, it makes us, I tell people, it brings purity, it brings power, and it brings purpose. That's what spiritual sound vibration does. It brings purity. You become the best version of yourself through spiritual sound vibration. It brings power, Because what you do is, through that spiritual sound vibration, you connect with divinity, and then you become an instrument in the hands of the most powerful. And it brings purpose. It helps you to remember who you really are and what you're doing here. And when you live according to your purpose, then everything makes sense. So the sounds of this world they may stimulate us, but they don't bring purity, they don't bring power, and they don't bring purpose. Or if they do it in a very temporary way or a very limited way. And so that's the great opportunity of spiritual sound. But we also have rock bands that chant the mantra as well, if you're into it. Shelter and all such.
Thank you, Maharaj. Regarding the Dharma, especially for devotees, with all the different potential service and activities that we have, how do you actually practically identify what's the best thing?
What's your Dharma? How do you actually find your purpose? I think it begins with some analysis and some observation of oneself. What are your strengths? What are your weaknesses? What kind of activities do you do that make you lose track of time? What activities are just effortless for you? What activities do you do that generally people tend to appreciate that you've done? When we ask ourselves these kind of questions, we begin to understand a little bit more about the unique psychophysical frame that we've been given in this life. You can do a personality test, and you can just do a bit of observation and reflection to just see in what environments, in what situations, in what activities do you tend to thrive. Sometimes I ask people, like, if you were to write with your non-writing hand, how would that feel? And they say slow, messy, frustrating, and all those emotions. And I say, that's how it feels when you're living out of your Dharma. So now flip that and see what activities do the exact opposite. So I think it begins with some analysis, and I think we don't do enough of that. Like I was saying, I think in this world we're really expert at ignoring ourselves. I think the second thing is to ask. In our life, we need coaches, we need mentors, we need people who can help us to see things that we can't see in ourselves. And therefore, Dharma is usually a team effort. In the Eastern lifestyle, it was explained that the first 25 years someone would grow up with a teacher, one teacher, and that teacher would observe them and then help them to understand the unique gift that they were given. And nowadays we don't have that, unfortunately. So maybe that's something we can also look to incorporate. And a final thing I tell people is just attempt. We have to be ready to try. There's a tension in life between comfort and aspiration. And therefore, we don't want to give up our comfort, but at the same time, we know that there's aspirations that we want to explore, but we're not willing to give up our comfort. So if we're comfort and convenience focused, then we'll be experience starved. And so it's really about attempting and being ready to try new things. They say the most dangerous phrase in the English language is, we've always done it this way. So to be able to break out of patterns of behavior and explore what more there could be. So analyze, ask, and attempt. And through those three things you can begin to gravitate towards your Dharma. I don't know, yeah, just let me know when we're
Yeah, well, there you go.
Fantastic. Yeah. Thank you.
Thanks for your time. Following on from the last question about Dharma, would you say there's more importance to focusing on your Dharma in the material world or in the spiritual world? Or do you need an equal balance between both of them to get, I guess, overall satisfaction from life?
Yeah, thank you so much.
Cheers.
The Bhagavad Gita is a conversation which takes place on the battlefield. And that's really, really interesting because a battlefield is a place where the immediate is super important, because in a moment everyone's going to start battling and you need to know what to do. But a battlefield is also a place where the ultimate becomes very, very important, because at any moment anyone could die. So the battlefield is very, very interesting because it's the place where the immediate and the ultimate both hold an equal amount of concern. And so Krishna explains in the Bhagavad Gita that the most dynamic life is when we're simultaneously awake to both at every moment. When we do our duty in this world or our dharma in this world, we always couch it within the bigger understanding of where we're heading. And when we think of the bigger journey in which we're heading, we always temper it with understanding, what am I meant to do now? Both go hand in hand. And so yes, both require as much energy, as much attention. And the ideal life is the life in which both are actually integrated. There's a way in which to do your purpose in this world so that you're fulfilling your responsibilities and making your contribution and simultaneously advancing your spirituality. The Bhagavad Gita will tell us, don't just be a husband, be a spiritual husband. Don't just be an entrepreneur, but be a spiritual entrepreneur. Don't just be a mother, but be a spiritual mother. Don't just be an artist, but be a spiritual artist. In other words, when we aim our dharma towards spiritual pursuits, then we combine and do both simultaneously. Does that help? Thank you.
One last question.
All right, yeah, sure.
So you touched on transformation and becoming fearless. I remember a class you gave some time ago, you were describing yourself when you first moved into the temple as very introvert. That's how you described yourself. So, but then you found yourself, you're on the street selling books, now you're travelling all around, public speaking. So what was that single most influence of transformation that you find yourself in your position now?
Thank you. Yeah, in my life, I never wanted to stick out. I was like, I'm going to be in the crowd. Then what happened is when I was about 15 years old, I became like 6'2", and I was like, I didn't want to stick out here. And then when I was like 17, I became a Hare Krishna. I was like, okay. Then when I was 21, I became a monk dressed in bright orange. I was like, oh my God, this is not going to plan. I'm supposed to not stick out here, you know? And then I joined the monastery and I was like, okay, I'm just going to be like a low-key monk and everything. And then they're like, no, you have to be in front of the mic. And I'm like, no, I'm on the other side. No, you're on this side. Nowadays, I walk around as a sannyasi and I carry a stick. So I realized that was the icing on the cake for sticking out, you know. I really stick out now, you know, I mean, literally in more ways than one. I don't think I did transform. I think I'm still introvert. I get energy when I'm alone. It's still hard for me to speak in front of others. I do it. It's a service. And people are very kind. They allow me to They give me their attention and allow me to share something with them. But what transformed within me was that the opportunity to contribute outweighed the material awkwardness of it. So when I go to bed at night and I feel the satisfaction that, insignificant as I am, I could do something that perhaps would contribute to people's lives. The satisfaction of how that feels when you close your eyes at night outweighs any awkwardness in the activity. And so, if it were up to me, I'd sit in a room and write all day and communicate with the world through the pen. Because that's my most authentic means of communicating, but this is required, so I do it. And it's a bit of a push, but the satisfaction of service inspires me, and that's what keeps me going. Hope that helps. Thank you so much. So thank you so much for your attention, for being here, and for being such a wonderful audience. Hare Krishna. So maybe we can sing for 5-10 minutes? Or would you, is it? Or?
Yeah, if you like.
All right. Shri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda Shri Advaita Gadadhar Shri Vasadi Gaura Bhakta Vrinda Hare Krishna 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 Hare 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 Rama 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 Hare Hare Krishna 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 Hare 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 Rama 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 Hare Hare Krishna Krishna Hare 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 Rama 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 Hare 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 Krishna 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 Hare 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 Rama 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 Hare 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 Krishna, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. Hare Krishna, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. Everyone loudly, Hare Krishna, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare Krishna, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare, Hare Krishna. Hare Krishna, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. Hare Krishna, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. Hare Rama, Rama, Hare Krishna, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. Been sitting down for a long time, so if you like you can stand up, stretch your legs, dance, let go, align with the divine. Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Ram, Ram Ram, Hare Hare. Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Ram, Ram Ram, Hare Hare. Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Ram, Ram Ram, Hare Hare. Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Ram Ram, Hare Hare. Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. Hare Rama, Nitai Gaur Hari Bol, Hari Bol, Hari Bol, Nitai Gaur Hari Bol. Jaya Jaya Prabhupada, 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 Jaya Jaya Prabhupada. Jaya Jaya Prabhupada, 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 Jaya Prabhupada. Janitai Gaura Premanande, Hari Bol. Good night, God bless. Thank you very much. Give yourselves another round of applause. Thank you so much. Oh, that was too short. It's 5 minutes.
Oh, wow. That's not working, right?
Thank you everyone for coming. Maharaj is getting pretty prolific with books and writing of the books about these subjects, many topics. We have 4 different varieties of books on the table as you exit, so you're welcome to have a look, and they're for purchase also. So thanks again for coming. Hare Krishna. Maharaj, thank him also. Big Hari Bol. Keshava Swami.
Okay, yeah, for the is it in here?
Yeah.
Very good, Maharaj. Hare Krishna.
Yeah, I just wanted to say something. This is Monique. She's coming to
Nice to
London.
meet you. Oh, okay.
She's got in touch with Suchiran.